Do you ever remember the first time you wondered when someone told you, let's say, what God was, and before you got too indoctrinated into what God was, you wondered, what is that? What is God? And in that very curious, sort of beautiful way that people can do. Or you ever have some of those, you're parents, you have your child comes up and says, Mommy or Daddy, what's God? You know? And all of a sudden you're challenged. They're in that very curious, beautiful state of being, you know? They don't actually need an answer. Because the answer that anybody would provide them is not actually the answer. If you can say it, it's not the real thing. And yet it's so natural to a human being to have these sort of curious and innocent wonderings about life. Before it becomes a technique that you're expecting a payoff from. You know what I mean? Before, like, who am I becomes a cliche question that you imagine you're supposed to ask yourself. But when it's actually real, when it's actually very innocent, when it's very pure, and it leads you into a state of wondering and wonderment. Because the answers don't lead anybody into a state of wonderment, because of course they're not the answers. It's like when probably many of you had this experience when you were young, and maybe even as adults. I remember looking up at the moon once when I was quite young, and I just thought, wow, how far away is the moon? How far is it? And just living for a moment in the wonder of that. Fortunately, I didn't have an adult around when I was wondering about that to say, well, little Stevie, it's, whatever it is, 450,000 miles from Earth or something. But just to be in the wonderment. Because this is where our spiritual instinct can really does flourish. That's where where it really lives. As the great psychologist and psychiatrist Jung had said, that one of religion's prime functions is to protect you from having the authentic religious experience. Because it replaces the actual experience with dogma, right? This is how it is. And it may not actually intend to rob you of the authentically spiritual experience or real religious experience, but it often does. It's a great kind of secret when you realize, at least when it applies to spirituality. Now, if you're a scientist or you're at work or in 100,000 practical ways, we ask questions in order to get very specific sort of basically practical answers. But in terms of spirituality, it's a very powerful secret to come upon the knowledge which is simply that so much of it is entering into the state of not knowing. And you hear this echoed in almost every esoteric, inner spiritual tradition. Whether, in the tradition that I was in for a long time, in Zen Buddhism, you're very encouraged not to know, to enter into a state of not knowing. In Christianity, you have the great contemplative work, the Cloud of Unknowing, or St. John of the Cross. In order to come to know what you know not, you must go by a way in which you know not. Simple, isn't it? In order to come to what you know not, in order to come to what you don't know, you must go by a way in which you don't know. It's counterintuitive to what we get in school, which is I don't know and I need to know, otherwise I don't pass the test, or I don't get the gold star, or I don't get approval, or, like I said, there's a sort of practical kind of learning and knowledge that we all go through. But we're not really told much about the beauty and the power of not knowing. That consciously and willingly allowing ourselves to not know can actually open us up to the deepest spiritual insights, the deepest revelations.